To Independent Women's Forum's Patrice Lee Onwuka, Layfield Report CEO John Layfield, and Capitalist Pig hedge fund manager Jonathan Hoenig. Good to see the three of you. John Layfield, first to you, what's happening with the market today? I thought we were going to be up.
Well, I think it's so many mixed signals going on out there. I think it's very good that we could end up with some type of trade deal with the Chinese. I don't think we're going to get a good deal, but I don't think it matters. If we just get a deal, I think that's very good for the market. I think you see a lot of conflicting factors out there. When you see construction, when you see data coming out of Germany, Italy, data that was coming out of China even before the trade war, there is a global slowdown. But what you're seeing in the United States, though, I think is very positive. It's why we had about a 17% corporate earnings growth this quarter. That was double for what was forecast because of the fact that since 2015 and 2016, about 80% of the accelerated growth in GDP came because of private domestic investment. That portends to, going forward, a very bullish sign.
Jonathan, the question of where to put your money, you'd been talking about gold before, but gold has taken a hit over the past week. It's down again today. The suggestion is that because inflation is not a concern, you don't need to hedge with gold. What do you think?
Yeah, I think now is the time, David, straight up for caution. I mean, look, the news is bullish, especially as John alluded to, the prospect of that trade deal we've been hearing about for months and months. That's bullish. The economic data is bullish. Everything from employment to inflation. Even the breadth, David, is bullish. 150 new 52-week highs today, only about 20 new 52-week lows. That being said, I do think now is a time for caution, even including today's 400-point drop. Look, optimism is very high. Pessimism is very low. Debt is very high. These are the type of scenarios that usually accompany a market top as against a market bottom. So I'm very cautious right now, and I think now, especially considering today's drawdown, is a good opportunity for investors, quite simply, to sit on their hands.
By the way, what about, I want to drill down on this a little more, Jonathan. You had been mentioning gold last week or the week before last. What about now that it's come down?
No, I don't buy dips, David, but I still think that the dollar is going to weaken and that gold and precious metals are a great place to be in 2019 and the years ahead.
Now, Patrice, you have this kind of interesting dynamic in the administration. You had the president with a 2-hour gangbuster speech to CPAC over the weekend, really talking up the economy, and he's got a lot to brag about. From the jobs figures to wage growth, et cetera, investment is up. What about the pushback by Kevin Hassett from his team of economic advisors, kind of talking down the economy a little? Where's the balance there?
Well, I mean, I think he's trying to be, Kevin Hassett is trying to measure some expectations. I mean, looking at growth for last year, 2.9% or 3.1%, depending on which figure that you go with, that's still very good. When you look at consumer confidence, it's actually rebounded after 3 months of dipping, in part because people are looking at the lack of volatility in the market until today, but also just a strong jobs market. And so you've got the president thinking about 2020, thinking, how am I seeding a message that's saying this economy is working well, and policies instituted by my administration working with a Republican-led Congress is what has gotten us here. But then you guys have his economic advisors saying, well, we also don't want to send any sort of messages that will be a stumbling block in the way of that economic progress. So, I think you'll see them kind of come together, but they're really not that far off.
Yeah. By the way, the market did just dip into the 400 territory to the negative. John Layfield, no matter what you think of the president, and I know you and I have talked about problems that we have with his style and some of the specific policies, but you can't deny that the economy is in a much better place now than it was before he was president, right?
No, I don't think you can. You look at the numbers of private domestic investment. In 2015 and 2016, it was 0.1% of GDP. Since then, it's been 0.95%. That's the 80% that growth of what the acceleration in GDP. And that's because of the perception, at least, of a more business-friendly environment from the administration once the president came out with these tax cuts and the cuts and regulation that he's proposed and that he's also done. Look, the problem I have is the trade war. That's one thing that, like Jonathan says, this there needs to be a lot of caution because that's something the market can't control. And if the market can't control it, the market can't price it. That's a real problem.
Well, and he does have pushback within his own economic team, as I mentioned before. I mean, there are people, there's a pretty good balance when you consider the Larry Kudlows of the team with the other folks who are more fair traders as opposed to free traders. But you consider, Jonathan, the alternative to what you have now. I know you have, as a libertarian, as a strict libertarian, you have a lot of problems with trade and other things that the president does. But consider the alternative. I mean, the alternative is socialism. You don't want that, do you?
No, David, listen, there's no question the economy is doing very well, and we shouldn't be naysayers about that regardless of what your feelings are about the president. I just think from an individual's investor's perspective, I don't like Warren Buffett's politics, but I think he was right when he said that you have to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. I see tremendous enthusiasm and optimism out right now. At the same time, David, many Americans couldn't come up with $1,000 if they needed to and have record credit card debt. Now's a great time to get your financial house in order.
Patrice, we've talked about this in the past, the question of how this president and his political team considers their opposition. Does he like it when the socialists are ascending, when the socialists look like they're going to take over the direction of the party and maybe all the way to the convention?
Absolutely. I mean, the straw poll at CPAC noted that Biden would actually be his strongest foe, but his dream foe would be Senator Bernie Sanders. Why? Because he can draw such a stark contrast between capitalism, the benefits and blessings of it, and socialism, with a great example of Venezuela. And so, when you have your AOCs out there pounding the pavement for her Green New Deal that's going to take away our airplanes and have us, riding trains to work every day, even though we live, 1,000 miles away, that's a great way to say that socialism does not work. This is the very smartphone you're using to tweet this message is actually because of capitalism and because of a free market system. So, when he's looking in the future, it absolutely is great to have that stark contrast. But as I mentioned, Biden is someone who's far more to the center than some of his socialist friends. The challenge for him is just he's going to have to survive a very contentious primary season. So we'll see what happens.
John Layfield, as you're looking at the market now, feeling a little more comfortable with a 400-point drop. It had been resting at about 350 to the negative side for a couple hours. Now it's down significantly below 400. I'm just wondering, to Patrice's point, you got to be careful what you wish for, and I wonder how many investors are really concerned. I mean, they're not necessarily priced in a socialist victory. If that was the case, you'd see a much bigger drop than what we're seeing now. However, there must be a concern out there that somehow you could see a big Trump negative. Maybe he is impeached. Maybe it does affect him politically. And the socialists could find a way of weaving their way into power.
Yeah, Dave, that is the worst case scenario both for our country and for our market. If something happens to the president, either through impeachment or through an economy faltering, and the lead candidate now at the Democratic Party is a socialist, that person could very well get elected. I don't think a socialist can get elected if all things are being equal. Only about 18% of our country believe in socialism. I mean, that's the same amount of people that believe in Bigfoot. So there is a crazy factor there that'll believe in basically anything. So I just don't think that's a representative of the entire Democratic Party. I just think that anybody who's extreme, who says crazy things, is going to get a lot of press out there. And as long as that is kind of relegated to the crazy factor that America doesn't really want, I think that's fine. The worry is, though, that one of these people becomes the primary candidate for the Democratic side, and somehow the president falters through whatever happens, a foreign policy mishap, an economy falter, and one of these people gets elected. That's worst case for our country.
And Jonathan, if there is a recession, even if it's a very mild recession, I mean, we are due, according to economic cycles, we're due for a recession. But remember George H. Bush, when he was trying to get reelected back in 1992, there was a small recession. It was over by the time of the election, but it hadn't really, the news hadn't really kicked in at that point. But as small as that recession was, it prevented him from being president.
Yeah, and David, as I recall, I mean, George H.W. Bush had enacted those steel tariffs at the beginning of his administration.
Jonathan, let's be honest. It was more about his violation of the No New Taxes pledge, I think, that did it.
Sure. A bunch of factors. But as you said, David, look, the president wanted to wear the market's ascendancy on the way up. If we get a recession, if the market falters, he's going to have to wear that downturn as well. Yeah. And we'll see how well he can navigate that if and when it comes.
All right. John and Patrice, the reason I focused on Jonathan, I had a very selfish interest. He's going to be joining me at 5 p.m. Eastern on Bulls and Bears. You can all watch that right here on FBN. Thank you very much for being with us, folks.